Okay, and that's our 5 seconds, so I think we're good. Okay.
The Oregon City Library Board will come to order at 5 p.m. In attendance are Ken Hall, Larry Osborne, Cynthia Andrews, Scott Edwards, David Goldberg, Nick Dirkman, and Carrie Linder, as well as library staff Greg Williams, excuse me, and Denise Butcher. First item is approval of the minutes from last month. You should have received those in the email last week. If there are any corrections or additions, and if not, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Minutes are approved. Next item is public comments, and I don't see anyone here, so we're doing our jobs. Next item, we will go to the library director's report.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Glad to see everybody here on this lovely evening. Let me get this started. All right, before I get into the library director's report, I wanted to let everybody know I'm modifying the format a little bit. I'm trying to divide the chunks of information I provide into various categories, which I think are fit together and are of use. So things like the facilities, finances, city commission actions, library operations, et cetera, et cetera. If you have any feedback on different categories that would be useful to use, or if anything doesn't make sense, please let me know. I want this to be useful and good information for everybody. So with that, I will start on library staff. I won't spend a lot of time on these because I know you've had a chance to read them, but library staff, so we have instituted some regular team meetings in the library to make sure that all of the staff in our various areas, adult services, youth services, technical services, and the like, just have an opportunity to get together with myself and Denise and each other. I'm a big believer that the most effective and efficient ways to address challenges and talk about things are to have the right people at the table at the same time. And so our thought is to just make sure that we provide regular opportunities for that to happen. And so far, I think it's been going very well. So staff-wise, at our February staff meeting, we also welcome Dan Haynes, who is the Oregon City Police Department's Homeless Liaison Officer, and Robin Schmidt, the Director from Father's Heart Ministry, to talk to staff. I don't know how much has been shared with the board in the past, but one of the things that we do spend a good deal of time at the library working on are behavior issues and working to best support our patrons who are experiencing homelessness. And so any resources that we can bring in to help staff, give them better tools for doing that, and just being able to talk and trade ideas and how to better support those patrons is very helpful. That's why we had Officer Haynes and Robin come in. It was very well received by staff. It's always good to keep dialogue going between those two people in the library. And we also were able to celebrate Robin was integral in helping one of our regular homeless patrons actually secure housing. So and when that happened, we were very, very pleased. We are very happy that he's still coming to the library. Yeah. He has found transportation between his temporary housing in Beaverton and the library. So we still get to see him. It was just a great success story that, he reached out for help and he was able to get some through those organizations. So, library grounds and facilities. Some of you may be aware of, we have sliding doors which cover the kitchenette in the meeting room. And those sliding doors are very, very heavy. They don't have handles for people to put their fingers in. So you have to move them by sticking your fingers in between each of the hanging doors. And when they open, they damage the facing around the opening to the kitchenette. And so we had a discussion with our facilities person, saying, what can we do to fix that? And her feedback was, the doors are just going to keep damaging it. If I fix it, there's really no point. So we are experimenting with keeping those doors open, just to avoid, the potential damage to the rest of the facility, to make it easier for staff to not have to move them open and shut every time. And we're just seeing how that works with programming in there. We have kids programming in there. We don't want them, getting into the microwave or the refrigerator. So we're experimenting with that. We are also working with the Parks Department to erect a sign documenting the history of Library Park, and I included an image of that. And I believe that's something that this group has seen before, or has talked about before. I talked to Nick a little bit, and I wasn't sure if that was something the board had talked about in the past. It was and Nick, please fill me in when I inevitably misspeak. This was in memory of Carl Clapp, correct, who was a former member of the Friends of the Library and did a lot of support. And so there was a community fundraising effort to raise funds for this sign to put up in the park in his memory. The sign has actually been made. It's currently with the Parks Department. They have a few more steps to walk through before they can get it approved to put on the premises. And it will be to the right side of the Carnegie, I think,
So
as you walk in.
if you're facing straight on, it will be to the left.
To the left.
It was to the right when we were facing the other way.
Okay, all right. And the sign it's been built to, designed and built to National Park Service standards, so it should be a great sign. It's very informative, so just wanted to make sure the library board was aware of that. Library operations. We have been spending a lot of time recently, as you may imagine, on coronavirus, on doing things. And I got an email from Scott asking to just talk a little bit more about what we've been doing and maybe engage in some discussion about things going forward. So we have been, we want to do everything we possibly can to ensure the safety and well-being of our patrons. Also recognizing that there are, we want to make sure that we're being responsible in the information that we put out there and that we're providing good guidance. So the steps we have taken, we have posted signs all throughout the library that are from the CDC, which encourage people to take the precautions that we've all heard about recently: washing your hands frequently, coughing into your elbow, staying home if you're feeling sick. We have made disinfectant wipes and hand sanitizer much more available throughout the library. We did have a couple of sanitizer stations and a wipe dispenser already, but we have put disinfectant wipes at every service desk. Same with hand sanitizer. We have put signs out letting patrons know that they can come to the desk and use them. We are having staff routinely wipe down high traffic areas, service desks, keyboards, the like. We are having our janitorial service do an extra thorough cleaning every evening of those same areas, high traffic areas. We have temporarily removed the toys from the kids area, so the little tiles and Legos and the like. And when we were doing it, it was we didn't get a chance to do it before the kids were there. So when we were taking them out, we actually had some kids helping us, and they were very, very happy when they were helping us do something, put everything in a box, and then when we walked them away, that's when the unhappy faces came out. So no, they're not coming back? No. So we have signs up explaining to patrons that just out of an abundance of caution to make sure that we're doing everything we can to ensure the health and safety of kids, we have taken those away. We've gotten a couple of questions about them. Most everybody that we've provided information to has been very understanding and supportive of it. So, and we have, we're trying to pull back on serving any sort of communal food at library events. So, for example, our Dungeons and Dragons Club had typically they would have some popcorn that you just reach in and, grab a handful. And we stopped that. And our first Friday film, we had individually bagged, chips and cookies and snacks. So just things to keep people from, sharing communal food sources. We are continuing to monitor the situation on a daily basis. We work very closely with the city to see what guidance has come out from the CDC, from the Oregon Health Authority, from Clackamas County. We are in frequent conversations with other departments to see what other steps we can take. There have been some developments recently. Seattle Public Library has canceled programming, meeting room usage, and events, and I believe the Camas Library has done the same thing. As of yesterday, there were no, Multnomah County Library had not made any changes. Washington County Libraries, I think they had one program that the service provider decided to pull out. And within Clackamas County, I think there have been a couple of programs like that as well that the service provider has decided, no, we're not going to do that. So we're continuing to monitor the situation. There should be a statement going up. I hope I'm not jumping the gun, but I got an email from the city. We have put together a statement to put on the city website that prepares people and lets them know that we're continuing to monitor the situation, and that if necessary, we may need to alter programming and operations hours at public facilities, including the pool, the library, the court, et cetera. So the city hasn't made a decision to do any of that yet. It's just informing the community that this is something we're looking at and may come down the pike. So that's kind of where we are. If we'd like to discuss any other measures, or if you have questions, or if you have feedback from a community perspective on what we're doing or other steps that the community might want to see us take, I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
I have a question.
Yes.
And I don't know how long the virus stays alive in a sense on materials like books.
3 days.
Yeah,
3
there's
days.
just a new study that came out today.
So we're checking books in
Yes.
and we may be passing them out. Is there anything we can do from that standpoint?
So logistically, it would be, we just talked about this a little while. It would be very, very difficult. I mean, part of me thinks, if every single book that comes in and out of the library is a concern as a transmission vector, you're talking about maybe taking more drastic steps of closing a facility. The amount of books that we get in every day, that's about 1,000, did we decide? We just pulled this.
We just did this, yes. 1,782 items are checked in per day.
Right. And so if you were certain of the 3-day thing, you could look at setting something up where you quarantined the books for 3 days. But again, since we have books coming in from different libraries, we don't know how long they've been in transit. We don't know what steps have been taken there. I've seen some libraries on the Oregon listserv. A couple have bought UV disinfectant equipment, but that requires training and personal protective equipment and things like that. So there's things we could look at, but there are big operational considerations.
Just as a matter of historical perspective, this same question came up during the Spanish flu in the early century. And at the end of it, it was determined that there was no transmission by books.
Oh, okay.
Now, that doesn't mean it wouldn't happen.
That's right.
Yeah.
And everything that we've seen, I mean, the guidance that has come out from OHA and CDC has focused on social gathering, social distance. And so to me, programs, events, meeting room spaces, if you want to take that next step, or if it's determined that next step is necessary, that would be a place to focus on. Obviously, we do have people coming into the library, and they do get within 6 feet of each other. Again, that's the next step would be considering facility closures, but we're not there yet.
This has been an area I've worked in the past, and I suspect what's going to happen is that this is going to be very quick. I mean, in maybe a week, the world's going to be different. And so we're going to need to be prepared to deal with closures, because I suspect schools are going to close and some other things too. I think this looks very bad right now. Yeah.
So one thing we have done, like as we've been talking with the city, we do have internally, we started to make some plans on how we would communicate to make sure that we can get information out to the community about any closures or any adjustments to operations. So we've got that, and the city has been talking about continuity of operations and the like. What does it mean if facility closures have to happen? So.
Any other comments on this topic?
On this topic, does anybody have any real good idea how long the virus can survive in a non-biologic situation?
The article that Scott forwarded, and I got that forwarded from somebody else. I haven't even had a chance to read it yet, and I know it's from the Oregonian, and I don't believe you said it's not peer reviewed.
Not peer reviewed yet.
So that said 3 days. The literature I looked at beforehand, which was looking at similar viruses in the past, was 9 days. But I don't think anybody knows at this point. So.
Yeah, I've heard originally something like hours, rather than days. And I would think that people who handle the returns should at least wear gloves.
And we do make gloves available to all of our staff. So, yeah.
And I'm sure if I turned a book in today, how soon would it be on the shelf in this library versus one in, let's say, Canby or someplace. I mean, several days, I would think.
Well, ideally in our library,
Hopefully, at least by the next day.
Yeah.
1 to 2 days max is what
Yeah.
we aim for.
and going out to another library, it would go out the next day, and then the other library would receive it. And how quickly they get it on the shelf, that we don't really know. Generally, libraries try to get them back on the shelf pretty quickly. So
I think also we're going to probably learn a lot about this, and I suspect we're going to have another bout of this next year. So this is not over.
no, I think
Maybe we'll
you're
have a
correct.
vaccine.
Well, no.
Maybe.
Oh, we need the microphone.
I got waved at. I guess I wasn't close enough.
Your microphone's not on.
Oh, well, that. Thank you.
Okay. So again, we are monitoring. I think the next step that we would look at and consider would be what we do with programming, outreach, and events, gatherings at the library. And so, trying to have a game plan of how we communicate that out to the community, how we do that is the preparation that we can make right at this point. But if there's other feedback as representatives of the community, does that sound reasonable? Is that
Do.
okay?
Thank you, very thorough.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. What's my place? Policies, I wanted to let everybody know. I know that Mo had shared a potential schedule for bringing some policies to the board to review. I will say that we are still currently in the process of reviewing those. So again, it's my first month. We have discovered that some of the first policy we looked at, for example, was the internet policy. And it hasn't been looked at. Again, its normal schedule is being followed, but I think that normal schedule is a three-year schedule. And so going through it, we found some things that we really feel we need to add and look at. And so it's been very worthwhile taking, getting staff together and taking a more thorough look at those policies. So we continue to do that. We should have the internet policy ready by our next meeting. So we'll have that, and then we'll continue with the other policies.
How about the one for the community room and use of the community room?
Community room, we are looking at that. What we're looking at with that is how we facilitate after-hours access, or whether we can successfully facilitate after-hours access to the community room. And the concerns are safety. We've talked with the city. There are some liability concerns about letting members of the public into a city-owned facility without any sort of supervision or trained staff available. If we have trained staff available, that's a cost and a scheduling thing. So we want to make sure that we go forward as responsibly as possible, protecting the city, providing reasonable access to the community, and we're still kind of working out how we do all that.
So I know neighborhoods, there were 2 neighborhoods before. Yes. Are they still meeting there, and are we still accommodating them?
Yes.
With somebody being there?
We are still accommodating them, so either Denise or I will be there to provide staff assistance. We've done a few schedule changes for Denise to make her life a little easier. So when she does have to stay late, it's not her second or third late night at the library. But yes, we will continue to do so until we have a better solution.
Have you considered using volunteer staff?
We've talked with the city about that, and again, it's a training issue. There's a level of training in order to make sure that they can reasonably accommodate what might happen, and a lot of it is since those meetings are open to the public. It would be a member of the public coming in and perhaps doing something in the facilities, having a behavior issue that they are not trained or equipped to deal with, or that might require, some more significant intervention. I think we had that sort of happen at one meeting.
Not this McLaughlin neighborhood, but the one before. A patron experiencing homelessness came in, went into the bathroom, and we could not get her out. So if I had not been there, it would have fallen on the neighborhood association to try and get that person out. And they may not necessarily be trained to do that.
I guess I was thinking in terms of trained volunteer staff. like our volunteers that we have at the library now? Is that, I'm wondering if that's a possibility.
It's a possibility we can look at with volunteers are volunteers. And so they could stop volunteering at any time. They might not be available. It's hard to tell a volunteer, you will be available for these particular shifts, forever and always.
Come on, I volunteer. I'm joking.
Well, I also think the liability to the city is different if it's a staff member versus a volunteer.
I understand.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to come up with something creative.
Nope. And we really appreciate it, but while we figure it out, we are making sure that those neighborhood associations can continue to meet.
I just know that can flare.
Yeah. Yep. We're aware of that. Library programs, the one we finished our One City, One Book event in February. It was a great month. We had a wonderful author talk at Clackamas Community College at the end of February. Over 60 people showed up. The author, Heidi DeRoe, she was a great speaker. She had some wonderful stories about finishing her manuscript and kind of her journey. Clackamas Community College was very, very pleased with the partnership, and we are very much looking forward to working with them in the future to do something like this again. They were basically right after the event was done, they wanted to start planning, for next year. So we took that as a very good sign. Let's see, City Commission.
Question?
Yes.
I think I've asked this question in the past too. So, so we had 250 books that went out. Mm-hmm. Was that a success? How do we measure success?
I think it was a success in that was the number of books that we had to distribute. I think we can talk about success. I think it'd be easier to look at year over year, the increase in the participation in the program. I know Lake Oswego has been doing this for 10 years now, and they have more people participating. I think they give out more books. But this was our first year, so we can definitely think of some success metrics. I think part of it is also that was the amount, that was what we requested from the Friends, and they were able to fund, and so they were able to fund us giving out 250. But
I struggle with the fact that we have 58,000 people in our service area, correct?
It's closer to 60.
Okay, yeah. 60.
Yep.
It makes it more challenging. So we did 250 people out of 60,000.
Oh, yeah. No, that's true. So, and we can look at other ways. We've looked at, it'd be in my former life, working with some other libraries, we've looked at also making additional ebook copies available during Community Reads events so that people don't actually have to travel to the library to get there. Ebook licensing and costs are another issue that libraries struggle with. So it's just looking at the economics of that, how we can do that. So, but as it grows, we would certainly look at other ways to get that material.
I guess I'm looking really across all of our programs, and how do we know how do we measure success? So, and we don't have to go into more detail now, but I just think it's important.
I completely agree with you, and assessment is a huge part of the strategic plan, and it is. We will be doing more assessment in the future. One of the things we've been talking about in our team meetings with our staff is making sure that we have, when we're developing programs, so that we have a process that we can go through from the conception stage. Why are we putting this program together? How does it relate to our strategic plan and our goals? Make sure we've planned it appropriately, and at the end, make sure we're collecting feedback and evaluation to make sure that this achieved our goals, make sure that this was a program that was valued and wanted by the community to help us make further decisions going forward. So that's one example of, yes, we will be integrating assessment into our everyday operational activities. Okay. City Commission updates. I just want to update the group. On February 19th, the Commission did approve the bylaws updates that were recommended. And we are in the process of updating the municipal code to better reflect those updated bylaws. So the changes to the service area, designating that the area focuses on the users of the entire service area, not just the city, and also changing the calendar, the new officer's calendar. So those changes are in process. We had the first reading on the 4th, and the second reading will be next month, or next City Council meeting on the 18th. The library district, the cooperative, we have incorporated a new feature on our checkout receipts. There's an example here. It shows when you check out in person and go to a staff member, on the receipt, it will show how much the patron actually saved by checking materials out from the library. So
Genius idea.
it's
Is that the cost of the book? or
yes, that's the cost of the book.
Just the direct, not with any of the processing costs or anything, just the direct cost of the book itself?
The direct cost of the book, and for our materials, that is our cost that we pay. So generally including a discount. So you could even make the case that the cost, the price that people are seeing on their receipts might be understated sometimes because we're showing the cost that we get as a library, not necessarily the cost that somebody might pay. But yes, and it's again it's an opportunity to reinforce the great return on investment that libraries provide for tax dollars invested and the value they bring to the community. So anything we can do to help tell that story, we're very happy to do. So. Our Library of Things, the libraries within the cooperative that lend things have all agreed to change the checkout period. So patrons can now check out Library of Things items for 2 weeks. They can renew them up to 5 times, and they can have up to 2 items out at once. That should make it much easier for people to access and use these items, and will also save us some space on the shelves. So we'd much rather those items be in the hands of people in our community rather than sitting on the shelf. And our next Library District Task Force meeting is scheduled for Friday, March 20th at 1:30. We met today with the Oregon City team. Nick was there. We met with sort of representatives from the finance department in the city of Oregon City and just kind of planning out what topics we think are most important for the city to advocate for covering during this process. And so it was a good meeting. I do want to add one thing to this section when we're talking about district things. Back in September, this body had talked about an alternate member for the Library District Advisory Committee. So Nick is the representative, and cities can have an alternate member. And there was discussion at the time that Larry was going to be the alternate member, and I had gotten a question last month about what the status was of that. So the status is I have that in process with the city to make that happen, but in reviewing the minutes and reviewing the audio, there was never actually an official motion or recommendation from this body to say that Larry is the alternate. So just so we can dot our I's and cross our T's, I would ask that if that's the direction the library board would like to go, if there can be a motion officially recommending Larry as appointment of the city's alternate representative to LDAC.
Your motion? Larry to be the alternate?
Sure, so moved.
Yep. Second?
I'll second.
All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay. And outreach and partnerships. I just wanted to highlight a couple of outreach and partnerships. The Oregon City Women's Club donated $500 to the library. We'll be using that for some additional materials and items to help individuals with disabilities. And our youth services librarian, Barrett Miller, presented a presentation to the Oregon City School Districts on finding diverse books. I've provided the link to her presentation online. It's a really interesting presentation, and it's just another example of how we try to do everything we can to support our schools and to bring our public library expertise to help the schools and the educators reach more students with more diverse materials. So
I just wanted to recognize, this past year has been it's been the amount of effort that's gone into the schools, and the fact that I think there's been meetings with every school, last year prior coming into the summer reading program. And I just think it's great that there's such cooperation between the schools and the library. And I think it's great. I think it should be recognized.
good. Thank you very much. Okay, on to statistics. You've got the statistics here. The one I'm going to focus on are people counters. So we have the new people count. We have the people counters reconfigured and remounted. So we were able to confirm that 2 out of the 3 people counters we had up were not configured to count correctly. Let me rephrase. They were configured in such a way that the way we were reporting them was inflating the statistics. So the way they were configured, we should have divided those numbers in half before we reported them, and that didn't happen. We now have them configured so that each people counter is reporting both an in and an out. It makes it much more clear which number we should be reporting. We started that a little before the end of February, so starting with March 1st, we should have better statistics. I have presented just a sample here for you. So the first row that you see there is a sample with all three people counters configured to count properly. And then I contrasted that with two random weeks, same duration from the past months that kind of show the counts as they were being collected. So as you can see, they were about twice as high. So, going forward, I contacted the state library to ask them if they wanted us to restate any of the statistics that we had submitted to them. They said that wasn't necessary. Just going forward with next year, we can report corrected statistics with a note on our submission explaining what the difference was. So going forward, we'll have much more accurate statistics. So if there are any questions about any of that, I'd be happy to answer them. No? Okay. Okay. Any questions about the statistics in general, or any?
Well, you asked us to look at those things, and I spent a fair amount of time with it, just trying to get my arms around sort of what's been happening over time. And there's some interesting things, and some really raise some questions. One, there seems to be a math problem in one place, and it's tiny, but it's annoying. And then, well, if you look at the total patrons from last month, 20,071 on the report, and you look at the new patron registrations, so if you add those together, you should get the next number, unless people withdraw.
People get deleted.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that wasn't clear.
Yes, so,
That's fine, as long as people are getting deleted. It was unclear as to why the math wasn't coming out.
Yeah, and we could probably develop a report which would show the number of people deleted. So yes, people who get deleted.
The thing that was really striking is that year over year, it looks like we're growing at about 8%. If we look at, 7.95%, if we look at the materials that are coming and going. Is that sustainable? I mean, what's the impact of that? That's a very significant number, it seems to me. And if they were sitting on the board looking forward, it's one thing to say, great, we're growing at 8%, how successful we are. But the other thing is, what's the impact of that? And what if we grow 8% next year and 8% the year after? Are we able to provide the same level of service with that kind of growth? And it raised that question because I thought that was a substantial number.
That is a very good question. So with circulations, when you have an increase in there, it's not necessary. So to me, the sustainability question comes down to a couple of things. It's whether you have the materials budget or you have the budget to purchase enough materials to satisfy demand, and then whether you have the staff available to process and check things out and make sure that the materials handling happens efficiently. It wouldn't be, we would have to do a more thorough analysis of these numbers, which is something we're going to do as part of our collection development analysis, to see when we have an increase in materials, which materials are increasing, which materials are checking out more. If, for example, if we do a better job of marketing travel books, in a month and letting people know that these travel books exist, we might already have them on the shelf. It's not that we've had to go out and buy more travel books. It's just that we have done a better job of promoting them. People have discovered them, and our circulations go up because people are now understand that this is available to them and it's something they can use. So in that case, there might not be that much more additional cost for collection development. On the staff side, it kind of depends how those transactions are being handled. So on the checkouts, one of the things I added here was on the self-check transactions, I showed you the percentage of how many of those transactions actually get done at a self-check machine. And so having a 75% rate is really, really good. I have heard when we did the RFID implementation, Denise can check my memory on this, there are systems that have achieved 90% self-checkout rates, that people have become accustomed enough to the technology to be able to most of the time handle their own checkout transactions. So as you get more people able to use self-checkout, that really reduces the burden on staff, on staff time having to do that. On the check-in side, yes, there is always, there's physical effort required in getting the materials checked in, getting out on the shelves. Those are where the technologies like AMH, our handler in there, and some of the check-in time savers that we have incorporated countywide come into play. So yes, there is going to be, as circulations increase, there is some staff time that has to be dedicated to it. I don't know, and I'll let Denise chime in. I don't think we're at a point where we're at the breaking point of being able to handle circulations. There are some things we can do internally to more efficiently allocate the staff that we have, but I don't think currently we're worried that we're going to get so much demand coming in over the next couple of years that it will completely overwhelm us. But that is definitely an analysis to.
I see two factors. One is ebooks, which is growing. And then the other one is the more efficient we become at turning inventory.
Yes.
That means with the same collection, you can, if you're turning it faster because of processing times and all those kind of things, then you can get more turns. But that does take, handling takes time.
Sure.
And fortunately we have, a decent amount of automation, so that helps a lot.
The other two things that I saw, I'm sorry.
And there's one other thing I wanted to say about circulations. I'm finding the numbers. I'm going to have Denise, looking at the numbers. I believe these numbers also include these circulation numbers in the library industry. Those include renewals. So those include renewals. So a patron renewing an item at home does not have any impact, any staff impact on us. We're very happy that they have renewed the item and can use it for longer, but that is something that gets incorporated into the statistics. So there's growth in both. We call them first-time circulations. That's when somebody first checks it out, and then growth in renewals as well.
The other two things that jumped out at me, one was that it looked like the money situation was relatively fair to Oregon City. That's if you looked at the gross numbers of the percent of the population, the assessment, and the share of the money coming from the district. One could argue a point or two here and there, but it looked, so that was reassuring in a sense, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussions and arguments about that. But the only thing that really jumped out that was a really concern was that volunteer hours were down 14% year over year, and I just was curious as to why that was. What happened there?
I would have to look into them. These volunteer statistics include both library staff volunteers, and we also put Friends of the Library volunteer hours in there as well, because that's volunteer hours that are directly helping us. So I would have to look at, and I think the Friends of the Library volunteer hours are probably a good chunk of that statistic.
Most of the chunk.
Yes. Yeah. So I would have to look and see what their change has been over time. Volunteer hours are great. We really love our volunteers. Operationally, I always want to make sure that there are certain things a library has to do to be able to operate and function, and you don't necessarily want to give all of that to volunteers because, again, volunteers can just decide on a day not to show up, and we've got to be there. We've got certain things that we have to get done in the course of the day to serve the public. And so there are some things that volunteers just can't do for us, So we have to be strategic about how we use volunteers. We have to bring them in. There's a staff time element to managing volunteers and things like that, so we want to be strategic about how we do that as well.
I just had a question going back to the checkout and the increases. Has there been any effort at the checkout desk, itself, to ask patrons why they're choosing to use the checkout, a regular librarian as opposed to the self-checkout machines? I just wondered what is driving people to the desk as opposed to using the technology.
So
for Oregon City, I'll punt to Denise.
So generally, we do have some population that just wants the human interaction. which, we like. But generally, if they have any account issues, such as fines, they lost their card, those sorts of things, they can only be done by a staff member.
Any other questions on statistics? Okay. All right.
Go ahead and move on to item 5. Am I following along correctly?
Yep.
Yep, okay.
Yep, it should be, library district distributions. I want to be respectful of time. So there was a request at the last meeting to have some more information about the library district distributions. So what I've put in your packet, I'll go over briefly what they are. So the first letter, library district distributions are done by the county twice a year. One at the end of January, and that is because a good chunk of tax revenue has been received by January. If you did the distribution any earlier, November and December can be a good significant chunk of money. And so if you do the distribution earlier, you're missing out on distributing that. So the county does one at the end of January, and then they do a second distribution towards the end of June. That is typically much, much, much smaller because there are not many more tax payments coming in. So this first memo represents the first district distribution that was done. So it was approximately $18.4 million. You can see the general distribution to each library service provider in Clackamas County. The next pages are kind of the backup documentation about how those amounts were calculated. I would be happy to go into the details if anybody would like them, either as part of this or if you have questions afterward. There was a little presentation that you'll see at the end of this section that talks in very broad terms about kind of the two buckets of money that are collected and how those get distributed. That's a pretty fair, that gives you a pretty good idea of how the money comes in gets distributed without having to go through all the math and doing the calculations. So, but basically the distributions are based both on the assessed value of properties within city limits and also the relative proportion of unincorporated population served that your library has in their service area. Those are kind of the two factors, and those two buckets of money just get distributed based on the relative percentages of those. So you've got the first distribution memo there. The second letter, the second one you saw there, it's entitled Fiscal Year 2020-2021 Estimate. So towards the end of February, the county also provides an estimate of what next year's distribution is likely to be. That is simply guidance. Every city has their own finance department, has their own budget process, and they can make their own estimates of what the district distributions are going to be. This is just meant to be the county's best guess at what you can expect, and the county is always very conservative when the county estimates those, because it's much better to provide everybody likes it when you come in, when money comes in higher than you expected. Nobody likes it when revenue doesn't come in where you expected. So this was the estimate for next fiscal year, and you can see it's approximately $20 million distributed amongst all the libraries. So, and then finally, that third part, that was just an excerpt of a presentation that was given at the first Library District Task Force meeting, which goes through just kind of how the money is distributed. So I would be happy to answer any questions about any of that or go into more detail. But again, I want to be respectful of everybody's time and attention span. So you let me know what questions you have about that.
Looking at Nick.
I've already asked all my questions.
I think Nick probably knows this stuff just as well as I do. So,
Anybody have any comments or questions? Okay.
I will say we're very grateful that the library district exists, and without that funding, library service in Clackamas County, it would have taken a devastating hit in 2008. So it really saved library services in Clackamas County, and so we're always very, very grateful that voters approved it, and we have that revenue stream. So, okay, next section, LDAC annual progress reports. So. As part of the library district, and Nick can jump in and kick me if I misspeak. The Library District Advisory Committee meets periodically. And in the Library District IGA, there is a requirement that each city report on their progress towards meeting the service standards that are outlined in the IGA. And so the instrument that has developed around that over the years, we call it the Annual Progress Report. And so the idea is that library cities fill out a report that just says, hey, taxpayers said, here's money to go achieve these certain things. Report back to taxpayers on what you did with that money and how closely, did you achieve those standards. The report has changed over the past couple of years. The Library District Advisory Committee has been very involved in kind of determining what information would be most useful, what would help do some apples-to-apples comparisons between cities. And so this is the current version of the Annual Progress Report that we have. It has taken a little bit to develop this report, so we've gotten a year behind in collecting the data from cities. So you have before you 2 years worth of Annual Progress Reports, one for fiscal year 17-18 and one for fiscal year 18-19. I have gone ahead and filled out all the information, the financial data that's based on the annual financial report from the city and some internal financial documents. We have put staffing numbers in there. The idea behind this annual progress report is that every local library board has an opportunity to review it, to discuss it, to ask any questions. And should there be any concerns at the local level about what a city is doing with the funds or what progress they've made, that would be a discussion to have at the local library level. And then Nick, as the representative from the library board, would be able to take that information to LDAC to discuss and talk about further. So I'm presenting this report to you. We can discuss it. We can ask any questions. The idea is that once the library board has had a chance to talk about it, made any corrections or any additional statements, is that Nick and Scott would basically sign off and say, yep, we've taken a look at this. We're happy to report this and kick this back up to LDAC. And then I would send that in to the county, just so they would have that. And then eventually the information does get consolidated and gets provided to the county commissioners. And LDAC may have an analysis of it or do something, do some report on it. So
I'm trying to recall what the due date is on this.
They wanted it before the next task force meeting, I think.
So it's coming up on the 20th?
Yes. Yes. So this was the first opportunity we had to have a board meeting to provide this. So now, if the board does want more time, what I could easily do is I could submit it as is and say, but our board, our board would like some more time to discuss this or look into it or anything like that. So,
anyone have any?
I just had a question, just a clarification. I don't know the difference between, I'm glad to see that we've got almost $3 million in the bank as a reserve, it looks like.
It's in our library fund, yes.
In the library fund.
In the library fund, yes.
Right. What's the difference between the library fund balance and that reserve balance that's at the bottom?
The 600,000?
Yeah.
So that is in the city budget. That is in I want to make sure I get the title right. That's the Community Facilities Fund. And so that is a fund that the city puts money aside to fund future facilities needs. So a capital reserve, basically. And so if you look at the budget document for the city, there are different facilities. I can't remember exactly how much that fund is up to, but X amount is for. I think they've got some for the police station in there.
So it's earmarked capital reserve.
Yes, in that fund, it's earmarked for the facilities fund.
Whereas the other is a general operating reserve
that is, yes.
It's not really a reserve, though.
It's the library fund balance.
It's a fund balance, yeah.
And it's kind of because we get that chunk of money. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's part of it's the fact that then it's, because we get the vast majority of it in one big chunk.
Right.
And then we have to operate the rest of the year on that. Yeah. And
I see. Okay.
So we have our fiscal year, which is really what we're reporting against. So right. it becomes, because every time I look at that number, I'm always going, wow, we have a lot of money. But then I realize, you'd have to really go almost back to the budget to really get true picture of how we're doing budget, because the cash is not really representative from, at least that's my perspective.
These are both fund balances at the end of the fiscal year. So
Right.
these are at the end of each fiscal year that's reported. So, I mean, and I will be honest, I have not had here at Oregon City as much chance to dig into the budget as I have in others. But in general, in your fund balance, you want to make sure you have a contingency. You want to make sure you have, money set aside. When I was at the county, we tried to, 10 to 15% was a great amount to have in there just to make sure that during the course of the year, if something comes up that you couldn't have reasonably foreseen, you've got some ability to do that. You wanted to maintain some money in there because of the way tax revenues come in. You've got to operate the first few months of the fiscal year and make sure you have enough cash balance on hand.
It is, because
So-
at the end of let's say we get the money, I can't remember, February? Is that when we usually get the first?
End of January.
End of January?
Yep.
Going into
So
February.
yep.
So we have about 4 months that we've actually expended of that money in rough view of it. And so we still have 8 months that we have to, before we're going to get our next big check.
Yeah.
So you'd have to, that's what I'm saying, it
Yeah.
becomes really kind of difficult to make that, to figure out what that number actually entails.
And so,
2.55 is blank. The question is if the library board has any concerns about allocated costs. And
yes.
Does anyone? No.
Well, I'm not sure,
That's
I know.
That's good. I will say that the looking at other cost allocations throughout the county, the city's very generous. They do not allocate everything they could. I would anticipate that going forward, they probably are going to start to allocate more costs to reflect the true cost of the service that we're receiving from the city. But from an operational point of view, we could not provide all the services that we need to run a library at a more reasonable rate than what the city, than what we pay in an allocated cost. Like an HR department, we have to have an HR department. And so our options would be, we could go out, we could hire our own HR specialist and, do all the compliance and do all of that, or we can pay our fair share to the city to utilize their HR department. And that's a wonderful bargain to be able to, to be able to do that. Same with IT, same with other services. So that's the philosophy of allocated costs. And I think this was added, Nick, you correct me if I'm wrong, I think this was added to the report because in the past,
It's a big
there
discussion
have been
topic
some,
for LDAC.
yes, some cities,
constantly
some
coming up.
advocates have felt that there are some cities who may be, they wanted to have some more.
Overcharging.
The concern is that they're overburdening the library. And, but every city has probably different ways that they do allocations.
Right.
I mean, at least to some extent.
Yep. And
I think
they
the
are,
other thing in Oregon City that's important is that we get 150,000.
yes,
Is that a year or I think it's year. Isn't
that
it?
is a year. Yep.
So that is another for our operations. So, I mean, I think that's important too. So in addition to all the services that are being provided, we also get 150,000 in cash.
Yep.
One other thing while we have this open, if you will, it looks like the threshold, the FTE in the library, it looks like we're understaffed by 5 people. Is that what that does mean?
So, so the library district IGA, so these are standards that are in the IGA.
Right.
So if you read the intergovernmental agreement, you will see it's attachment C, I think it is. And it says, with this money, libraries are supposed to strive to hit all of these Oregon Library Association standards with a particular emphasis on 3 things. And that was operating hours, collection size, and FTE. Those standards were current in 2008. They are no longer current. So, I think Mo has talked, maybe not with David, you weren't on the board, but Oregon Library Association standards have evolved since then, and they don't have specific FTE count standards anymore. It's much more, do you have the staff do you have sufficient staff to be able to provide these types of services to your community? So when we put this form together, since these were the standards that were in the IGA at the time, we felt it was necessary to keep those and to report on them. Would I like to have 5 more staff? Absolutely. I could find work for them to do, and we could do some things. So whether or not, that threshold standard of 19.41, is that the exact amount of staff that we need in order to provide service to the community? No.
And that's assuming that all of the services are performed by library staff.
Right.
And I was just going back to 2.24 through 2.29 here. Am I correct that everything except 2.28 and 2.29 are in that area, are basically personnel that we're receiving?
Sorry, which questions again? Once more, sorry.
This is the expenditure detail, specifically 2.24 through 2.27. Those are basically what we would have to pay for ourselves if we didn't contract it out. Is that right? Or it wasn't provided by the city?
That would be 2.21 allocated costs. So if you look at 2.21, that would be allocated costs. So I'm looking at the one I have in front of me right now is fiscal year 17-18. And so you'll see.
I'm looking at 18-19.
18-19, all right, let's get on the same.
It's the same.
Is it the same? Okay. So yes, so it's 2.21. So what it's saying is that in fiscal year 18-19, the city basically charged $8,000 in allocated costs. And for that year, I believe it was mostly IT. I left the backup in my office.
Just to make sure in my own mind what's going on here. So the item in, say, 2.26, that's actual expenditure, real live checks written by the library.
Correct, yes.
Oh, that makes it worse than I thought.
That's and that computer software and support, and Denise will tell me if I'm wrong, the majority of that are for the common databases that we share throughout the county that we have to pay for, and some of the software maintenance for our self-checks and things like that. The county negotiates a district-wide price, and then we pay a certain portion of that. So, but yes, that's an actual dollars out the door number.
So that means that if my calculation is just about right, our personnel costs are actually about 8% lower than the national average.
Hmm.
I think I don't know whether that's a good or bad thing.
That's
interesting.
Again, personnel costs being lower is great. I would always love to have more staff.
Love to have 8%
I can,
more
again,
people,
off the top of my head, I can think of many wonderful things we could do out in the community if we had more staff, but.
One more statement.
Yeah.
In addition, we have the central library function that comes from the county, and that is actually out of general funds, and that's like 2 million.
Out of the county general funds, yes.
Out of the county general funds. So it's important to know because we have the library district bringing, 18 million approximately. And then we have another bucket of money, in a sense, coming out of county general funds that supports that central function. So if you look at it in total, what's being spent on libraries in the county through the district and you're really talking, you have to add another couple million to it.
Good.
So would you like a motion then of approval from the board? Is that?
Yeah, if that would be wonderful. If there's a.
So if there was any, so this is approval of the 2018-2019 annual progress report. And you're gonna do that in the second?
I think we have to approve both of them.
Both, yeah. You can do them separately, or you can,
both?
yep, 17-18 and 18-19. Yep,
Okay.
but you can do them separately, or you could do them
Okay, so
jointly.
we need a motion to approve both the 17 and 18 annual progress report and the 18-19 annual progress report. Is there a motion for that?
I'll amend my motion to include both.
Okay, and then second? Second, all right, all those in favor of approval say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. All right,
Great. And then I did have a question. When I submit this, I'm supposed to put email addresses. As the chair and the LDAC rep, do either of you have a problem with me putting your email address on there? I mean, technically, it'll be a public record, and so I wouldn't want to violate your privacy by putting, okay.
that's good. Thank you.
And I think,
What's that? You make it bullied. Yeah, that's true. and that's, we've covered all of that then, so we'll move on to item 7. Did you have anything else?
Nope.
Right, no? Okay. Item 7 is communications. Nick?
I think we've already communicated what's happening with, well, it's not really LDAC. LDAC hasn't really met, and we don't really have a scheduled meeting, but the task force is really the next big meeting.
Cynthia, update from the Library Foundation?
The full board will meet in April. In the interim, the subcommittees are working on various goals that we set last month, and the subgroup around the Dolly Parton Imagination Library Operations and Management has met and will come back to the board with half a dozen recommendations regarding Dolly Parton Imagination Library Management. The board Governance and Structure Task Force will meet next week to consider those particular items. We are resolving problems related to the Oregon City Post Office, connected to the return of the Dolly Parton Imagination Library books. They've been difficult.
That's an interesting problem.
But Karen Martini, our intrepid chair, has been very persistent, and she's working out those particular details. But I should say to this board that it's one of the reasons why you haven't seen a full-fledged, very public rollout of the Dolly Parton project, because there are just a ton of details that need to be addressed and resolved before we do that. We are meeting our goals towards enrollment. We're at 89% of our expected goals by the National Dolly Parton Project. So that's really good, and that's with a soft rollout. And so it'll be 2 or 3 more months until we do really any kind of full-fledged rollout. So that allows us plenty of time to get all these details smashed down into the pavement, and the impact on staff and volunteers really clear in our heads. So it's going well. It's just that there are a lot of things that we didn't know when we first started. And then we're working on our donor database management. That's getting cleaned up and put into a more user-friendly, accessible format.
Thank you, Cynthia. Ken, you have an update from the Friends of the Library.
Well, not much to say, except they keep plugging away, and they're doing very well. They've, instead of, in the past, a lot of times they'd have to send books off to be repulped and thrown away, and now they're finding there are people who take books for distribution to people like homeless facilities and things like that. So there are people, they're getting a list of people who they can call to get the excess books removed rather than having them actually trashed. Last month they had 3,454 books donated. And they're basically always trying to find ways to encourage the public to come in and join them.
It's a great bookstore. I just bought 10 books.
And they have money available for projects.
All right. Thank you, Ken, Cynthia, and Nick for taking the extra time out to be our liaisons to these groups. All right, the next item is future agenda items. Does anybody have anything they want to add? All right, in that case, the meeting is adjourned.